They buried it so deep you were never meant to hear it. In the summer of 1812, in a quiet corner of Illinois, 40 children vanished into the earth within just 14 weeks. Not from fever. Not from famine. Not from any natural force men could name. Their bodies told a different story, bodies scarred with marks no child should carry. The official record reduced it to a line, scrawled by a trembling magistrate, methods employed beyond Christian comprehension. Then silence. 2 centuries of silence. Until the archives split open, until documents hidden in stone walls spoke of a man who believed he had discovered a new law of survival. A man who thought children must be broken to be made strong. His name was Josiah Crane. And what he built inside the walls of the Riverside Children's Home was not refuge, not shelter, not education. It was experiment. Deliberate. Calculated. Ritualized. 40 children went into his system. 12 crawled out. And what they carried with them was knowledge so corrosive, so dangerous, it was buried for generations. Tonight, you will hear what they were never supposed to tell. Once you hear it, you cannot go back. The winter before the tragedy was no ordinary winter. It was what historians later called the year without a summer. The sky itself seemed broken. Ash from distant volcanic eruptions dimmed the sun, turning noon into twilight. Rivers froze solid well into May. Crops withered before they sprouted. Livestock starved in barns that felt more like crypts. Survival became a word with teeth. And in the Illinois Territory, 30 miles northwest of what would become Springfield, the Riverside Children's Home stood isolated against this frozen wasteland. Built from limestone, its thick walls had once promised safety. A refuge for the orphaned. A monument to Christian charity. For 5 years, under the guidance of Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, it had been exactly that, orderly, humane, a beacon of care. But Hartwell's death in November of 1811 left the home leaderless, exposed. In the void stepped Josiah Crane. A soldier scarred by frontier wars, limping from wounds no surgeon could ever mend, his eyes carrying something colder than the winter itself. He promised discipline. He promised efficiency. The authorities, desperate, believed him. They gave him 47 children. In return, he gave them an experiment in human suffering so profound it reads today like the notes of a man building a new religion. December 15, 1811. Crane entered the main hall for the first time. 47 children stood waiting, their breaths fogging the cold air, their faces still marked with grief for the woman who had cared for them. They expected a caretaker. What they got was a commander. Crane's left leg dragged across the wooden floor, his limp echoing like a metronome of dread. He surveyed them not as souls to protect, but as subjects to be tested. His first words cut through the silence like a blade: "You have been living as weaklings. Fed when hungry. Warmed when cold. Comforted when distressed. That ends now." He divided them into groups, developing strength, building resilience, proving readiness. Labels that sounded harmless, but in his ledger, they were categories of endurance. Within days, blankets were removed. Meals were cut in half. The fireplaces went cold. Children stood barefoot in the snow as part of what Crane called tolerance exercises. At first, some believed he was testing them, pushing them towards something important. But the older ones, those with eyes trained by loss, felt it immediately. This wasn't education. This was erasure. Crane wasn't preparing them for life. He was teaching them how to suffer, and calling it salvation. January 8, 1812. Snow fell heavy that morning, blanketing the courtyard in silence. Crane ordered all 47 children outside. Shoes off. Barefoot in the snow. He called it cold tolerance training. Among them was 6-year-old Thomas Brennan, a small boy with a persistent cough, his ribs visible beneath a wool shirt far too thin for the season. The others begged Crane to let Thomas rest. He refused. Weakness, he said, was a disease of the spirit. The children stood motionless in the snow until Thomas collapsed, his tiny body convulsing, lips blue, eyes rolling back. Crane ordered the others to leave him there. "Let this be a lesson," he said. It was Mary Patterson, 14 years old, who defied him, running to Thomas, cradling him, sobbing as she tried to warm his frozen skin. Hours later, Thomas was dead. In his ledger, Crane didn't write child or boy. He wrote, "Subject T. Brennan, failure of willpower. Death confirms inadequate preparation." That night, Crane gathered the children and told them Thomas had perished not from cold, but from weakness. That his death was proof the training must intensify. The children listened in silence, grief mutating into something darker, fear. They realized then, no one was coming to save them. After Thomas Brennan's death, Crane stopped pretending this was an orphanage. He began writing what he called the Protocol of Resilience. The children would later whisper it like a curse, repeating its rules under their breath as if breaking them might bring punishment in the night. Rule 1: Hunger strengthens discipline. Meals were now bowls of boiled oats, thinned with water until the spoon scraped the bottom before the stomach ever felt full. Rule 2: Pain builds character. Each day, children knelt on gravel until their knees bled. Rule 3: Attachment breeds weakness. Brothers and sisters were forbidden to speak. Those who try Ed were separated into different wings of the building, locked away for days in silence. Rule 4: No comfort is deserved. Blankets, toys, even songs were confiscated, replaced with stone walls and the sound of Crane's boots echoing down the hall. What made it worse wasn't only the cruelty, it was the order. Crane logged everything. Every cough. Every stumble. Every tear. His handwriting was exact, as though he believed numbers and ink could turn torment into truth. In his mind, he wasn't a monster. He was a pioneer. He believed Riverside was not a place of suffering, it was a laboratory for the future of mankind. By February of 1812, the children had learned to survive not just the cold, the hunger, the endless drills, but Crane himself. Outwardly, they obeyed. They stood barefoot in snow when ordered. They swallowed thin gruel in silence. They endured the lash of his words without flinching. But beneath the surface, cracks of resistance spread. Mary Patterson, the same girl who tried to save Thomas, became their quiet leader. She whispered forbidden prayers at night, smuggling hope like contraband. Older boys stole splinters of wood from the firewood pile and passed them to the younger ones as charms, tokens against despair. A few even learned to cheat Crane's ledger, erasing marks of failure with water and soot before he could tally them. It was dangerous work. Crane's punishments grew harsher for anyone caught defying his system. Yet these small acts mattered. They reminded the children they were still human, not just test subjects in Crane's experiment. Still, the cost of resistance was high. When 9-year-old Abigail Cross was discovered humming a lullaby to comfort her younger brother, Crane forced the two to stand in opposite corners of the freezing hall for 2 days without food. By the end, the brothers' lips were cracked with blood. Resistance had a PRI. CE, but so did silence. By spring of 1812, Crane's authority had shifted from harsh overseer to something more terrifying, an object of worship. He began calling himself the Warden of Renewal, and forced the children to recite oaths each morning. I shed weakness, I embrace strength, I follow the Warden. The repetition was mechanical at first, but soon it became ritual. Punishments were no longer explained as discipline, they were framed as purification. When a child was beaten, Crane told the others they were witnessing weakness burn away like impurities in metal. When someone cried, he demanded the group chant in unison, "Weakness is death. Endurance is life." These chants filled the halls until even silence carried their echo. Crane dressed differently too. He abandoned his worn coats and began wearing black garments, stitched with crude symbols, geometric shapes that no one recognized. The children whispered that he stayed awake at night, scribbling those same symbols into his ledger, muttering as if in prayer. What terrified them most was not just his cruelty, but his conviction. He believed in what he was doing, believed he was chosen to forge a new kind of human. And in the isolation of Riverside, cut off from the world, some of the children, hungry, exhausted, desperate, began to believe him too. The first trial of loyalty happened on April 17, 1812. Crane gathered all 46 surviving children into the main hall. A single candle burned at the center of the floor, its flame flickering against damp stone walls. He pointed to two boys, 12-year-old Daniel Price and 13-year-old Joseph Clark. Both had been caught whispering in the dormitory. Crane called it a breach of protocol. He told the others the future demanded sacrifice, that weakness must be rooted out before it spread. Then he made the children choose. One shall suffer, one shall be spared. The choice is yours. He all fell silent. Daniel wept, begging for mercy, while Joseph stood trembling, unable to speak. No one moved. No one breathed. Finally, Crane grew impatient. He handed a wooden switch to Mary Patterson, the girl who had once resisted him most. Decide, he ordered. Tears streamed down her face as she refused. Crane seized Daniel, beat him until the candle went out, then turned to the others and said, "This is what indecision breeds, ruin." From that night forward, the children understood, survival meant more than enduring hunger and cold. It meant living with the knowledge that at any moment, they could be forced to harm each other, or watch in silence as Crane did it for them. By May, Crane's trials no longer ended with bruises or hunger, they ended with absence. A boy named Samuel Hodge, only 11, was the first to vanish. One night he was there, pale and shaking after a day of punishment, and the next morning his bed was stripped bare, his name scratched out of the ledger. Crane told the children Samuel had failed renewal and been cast into darkness. But none ever saw him again. Then came Ruth Jennings, then Thomas Riley. Each disappearance followed a trial, each disappearance unspoken yet undeniable. The children began to mark walls with chalk when no one was looking, recording the lost. Small white scratches lined the stones, proof that their memories couldn't be erased as easily as Crane's ink. But fear grew heavier with each mark. If silence once protected them, now even silence felt like complicity. Rumors spread that Crane kept a locked chamber beneath the orphanage, a place where the unfit were taken. At night, some claimed they heard muffled cries under the floorboards. Whether truth or terror's invention, the effect was the same, the children stopped sleeping. Every creak of the building, every shadow that shifted, carried the weight of disappearance. NCE. Riverside had become more than an orphanage, more than a prison. It was now a graveyard that hadn't yet been dug. Mary Patterson could no longer endure the silence. Each morning, she looked at the rows of empty beds, Samuel, Ruth, Thomas, children erased as though they had never existed. She was only 12, but something inside her hardened. If Crane was going to break them, she would break his secrecy first. One night, while the others lay restless, Mary slipped from her cot. She had stolen a splinter of iron from the woodpile, sharp enough to pry open locks. Moving barefoot across the cold stone floor, she crept toward the cellar. The air there was heavier, tinged with mildew and something fouler, something metallic, like rust, or blood. At the far end, she found the door they all feared, the one Crane kept chained. With trembling hands, she wedged the splinter into the lock. The metal groaned, then gave way. What she saw inside made her choke back a scream. Wooden cots lined the walls, but they were not beds, they were restraints. Leather straps darkened with stains, chains bolted into stone, symbols carved into beams above each frame. And in the corner, a small bundle of clothing, Samuel's shirt, stiff with dried blood. Mary's knees buckled. The rumors were true. Crane wasn't just testing them. He was sacrificing them. And now she knew, knowledge that could save them, or doom her next. Mary returned from the cellar pale and shaking, her nightdress streaked with dust. The children pressed her for answers, but she hesitated, knowing that words could become a death sentence if Crane overheard. Finally, in whispers, she told them everything, about the restraints, the symbols, Samuel's bloodied shirt. At first, disbelief clung to them like a shield. To accept the truth meant accepting that escape was the only hope. But as Mary spoke, their eyes hardened. Joseph Clark muttered, "He won't stop until all of us are gone." For the first time, silence didn't mean submission, it meant planning. Small alliances formed in corners of the dormitory. Scraps of bread were hidden away, nails pocketed from broken floorboards, ropes woven from bed linen. The youngest children clung to the older ones, desperate for protection. Yet rebellion was not born of courage alone, it was born of terror that had reached its limit. They no longer feared punishment more than death, because death was already moving through the halls of Riverside, one bed at a time. Mary's whisper spread like fire through dry grass. She had planted something far more dangerous than defiance. She had planted the idea that Crane could be beaten. Crane was no fool. He had lived his life among prisons, armies, and institutions where fear was currency, and he could smell when it began to thin. In late June, he assembled the children in the great hall, their bare feet pressed against the damp stone floor. A large wooden barrel stood at the center, covered with a black cloth. Crane's voice was calm, almost tender, as he spoke. "The walls whisper against me. The weak imagine flight. Tonight, we shall see who among you still carries loyalty." With a sharp motion, he tore away the cloth. Inside the barrel writhed a nest of rats, their fur slick, their teeth gnashing in frenzy. He called it, the trial of fidelity. The rules were simple: each child, one by one, must hold their arm inside the barrel for as long as he demanded. Those who resisted would join the missing. The first boy screamed as teeth tore into his flesh. Another fainted before he even touched the barrel. Blood pooled on the stones. Crane's eyes shone with a terrible zeal as he declared, "Only pain can purify the unworthy." That night, 3 more children disappeared. No one knew if they bled to death or were carried to the chamber below. But every survivor understood the truth: Crane was no longer testing them. He was breaking them for something darker. After the trial of fidelity, the dormitory stank of rot and fear. Bandaged arms oozed beneath dirty rags, and whispers of the vanished hung heavy in the air. Yet in that misery, Mary Patterson and Joseph Clark made their choice. Escape was no longer a dream, it was survival's only form. They met in secret beneath the staircase, voices low, every creak above them a threat. Joseph had scavenged nails and twisted them into crude hooks. Mary had hidden a length of rope plaited from sheets beneath her mattress. They mapped the building in their minds, counting the patrols of Crane's assistants, listening for the exact hour the front gates locked. Mary swore she heard Samuel's cries drifting up from the cellar some nights, and whether it was real or her imagination, it steeled her resolve. Their plan was simple: break into the cellar, free whoever was still alive, and flee into the marshes under moonlight. But simplicity didn't erase terror. If Crane caught them, they wouldn't just vanish like the others. They would be made examples, rituals for the rest to watch. Still, as Joseph whispered, "Better to die running than to die waiting," Mary nodded. The first seeds of rebellion had now taken root in a place meant only for despair. The night was starless, a suffocating black that seemed to press against the windows of Riverside. Mary's heart hammered as she slipped from her cot, rope coiled beneath her arm, Joseph close behind with his twisted iron hooks. One by one, the others stirred, their gaunt faces pale with terror, but their eyes lit with a fragile hope. They moved like shadows across the corridor, careful to avoid the lantern glow of Crane's assistants. The air grew colder as they descended toward the cellar. At the chained door, Joseph jammed the hook into the lock, muscles straining until the metal snapped free with a sharp crack. They froze. Silence. Then only the drip of water in the stone halls. They pushed inside. The smell hit first, fetid, metallic, thick with rot. In the flicker of their stolen candle, the truth unveiled itself. Cots weren't beds but altars, etched with symbols that spiraled like a language not meant for children to see. In one corner lay bones, not buried, but arranged, stacked like offerings. Mary covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Joseph's hands shook, but he whispered, "We take the living and run." Then, from deeper in the dark, came a sound that froze every child in place, a weak, rasping breath. Someone was still alive. Mary's hand found a small, shivering body huddled in the shadows, Thomas Riley, barely alive, his eyes wide with shock. They lifted him gently, hearts hammering, knowing every second counted. But above, the heavy boots of Crane echoed down the stairs. He had smelled defiance in the air long before it became visible. His voice rolled like thunder through the stone halls, "No one leaves until I say you may survive." Panic gripped the children, yet Mary gritted her teeth, gripping Thomas closer. Joseph moved silently, ready with hooks, while the others pressed into the walls, invisible in the dark. Crane's shadow fell across the corridor. He paused, scanning faces twisted with fear and determination, then smirked, a predator recognizing prey that might bite back. "So, you think you are clever," he hissed, "that you can undo what months of discipline have forged? Tonight, you will learn how unprepared you truly are." He raised his arm, and the lanterns ignited in a cruel choreography, casting monstrous shadows across the children. Fear tightened around their throats, but it could no longer paralyze them. They had seen the cellar. They had seen the truth. And now, facing the man who had killed their friends, they had a choice: submit or strike in the single moment they had carved from terror itself. The hall erupted in chaos. Lantern light swung, casting grotesque shadows as Crane lunged for Joseph, but Mary moved first, pushing Thomas behind a broken pillar. The older children fought, improvised weapons in hand, striking with desperation born of months of cruelty. One by one, Crane's control faltered, his commands drowned in the shouts, screams, and pounding of small fists and makeshift clubs. They reached the cellar door, prying it open with hooks and rope, the stench of months of fear spilling out like a tide. Survivors stumbled into the open night, lungs burning, eyes wide with disbelief that the world outside still existed. Behind them, Crane's voice carried over the wind, fury twisted with obsession, "You will never leave. You are mine." But the children ran anyway, across the frozen fields, past the skeletal crops, toward freedom that seemed almost unreal after the nightmare within. In the aftermath, historians discovered the ledger of Riverside, the secret journals of Josiah Crane, and the chalk marks of children who had refused to vanish quietly. 40 had died, yes, but 12 survived, a living testament to defiance in the face of deliberate evil. The tragedy of Riverside is buried, hidden for centuries, but its lessons remain. Some cruelty is methodical, some suffering engineered, and the strongest men, like the boys and girls of Riverside, are forged not by comfort, but by surviving the unspeakable.